College football and college basketball may both have the word college in their name, but there are too many differences to count. And the difference that I think is most relevant to this Iowa State matchup, a historic rivalry that Iowa State won yesterday, overcoming Iowa 20-19, is that in college football, you have 4 quarters for 60 minutes of game time. And a game typically lasts anywhere from 3.5 hours to 4 hours. Of course, got to factor in commercials, halftime, pace of the game. College basketball has 2 halves that are each 20 minutes long, so a total of 40 minutes of game time. And the games don't last as long as college football games. There is not a 3.5 to 4 hour basketball game. If this was played, this game, on the timetable of college basketball, Iowa would have won. Until the final, 2 or 3 plays of the game, Iowa was favored to win by ESPN's FPI. Iowa led 13-0 at the end of the half. Could have been 13-3 if Iowa State didn't shank their field goal, which actually implies that in the middle of the fourth quarter and not in the final few seconds, they should have been leading this game. If Kyle Conradi made his field goal before the half, it would have been 13-3. But Iowa dominated this game for about 3.5 3/4, and it looked like they were going to seal the game up in the final minutes of the fourth. But they didn't. Iowa State and Matt Campbell persevered. And Kirk Ferentz and Phil Parker and Tim Lester choked. Just is what it is. Iowa choked this game away. They choked away a rivalry game. And a game where they could have sealed a win over who I think now is a legitimate top 25 team. Iowa State faced a elite defense. They faced an improved offense, Iowa's best offense easily in 2-3 years. And, well, they competed. And in fact, they won. And if Iowa managed to win 19-17, or maybe one of those long passes doesn't go Iowa State's way, that wouldn't really have changed who Iowa State was. And it wouldn't have changed much of who Iowa was. This was a very close game. Very close game. And what I'm saying here is I'm not discrediting Iowa State's win, and I'm not crediting Iowa's close loss. What I'm saying is Iowa's schedule is very, very easy. And now, by losing to Iowa State, and with Ohio State looming on the schedule, and with how good Nebraska looked yesterday, Iowa can probably still go 10-2, but the lesson that should be taken away in this game is that you can't win all of the close games. You can't do it. And Iowa had a win within their grasp, and they let go. Or more accurately, Iowa State took what was in their grasp away from them. Iowa State had 361 total yards to Iowa's 303. Iowa had 2 turnovers, 2 interceptions. Iowa State had 1 turnover, 1 interception. Iowa had 16 first downs to Iowa State's 15. Time of possession was about equal. Iowa State just had 20 more seconds of possession. Both teams were pretty bad on third down. Iowa State was 2 of 14. Iowa was 6 of 17. It was really big passing plays that got Iowa State in a position to win. Iowa was the much superior team on the ground. The offensive line, I thought, for Iowa did a fairly good job, considering that their passing offense has a ton of work to do. Cade McNamara, 13 of 29 for 99 yards. No touchdowns, 2 picks, with a 9.7 QBR. It doesn't look like he's any different from who he was last year. Maybe a tad bit better, maybe. And to his credit, he did face a pretty darn good Iowa State defense that was injured and banged up at linebacker, but you have Jeremiah Cooper, you have Malik Verdun, you have Beau Freyler, who I said made up one of the best safety rooms in the country in the preseason. I mentioned that before in the preview of this game. And they combined had 2 TFLs and 2 passes defended. And Darian Porter had 2 interceptions, another defensive back for Iowa State. The secondary for the Cyclones stepped up, took advantage of a weak Iowa passing performance, and really, that along with Rocco Becht and Jalen Noel, that made the game right there for Iowa State, and also Jaden Higgins. Just players in the passing game on offense and defense stepping up big for the Cyclones. I want to get back to Iowa, and then we'll talk about Iowa State and close out this show. You can't win every close game, as I already said. 13 of 29 for 99 yards and 2 picks is the perfect stat line to describe this game. You are, as Iowa, I'm watching their offensive line in 4 quarters, and it is one of the Big Ten's better offensive lines. Iowa and Michigan are one in the same. Your offense is so one-dimensional that a good team, Texas is elite, I think Iowa State is good, maybe great, but both Iowa State and Texas had experience advantages over Michigan too. They came on the road, Texas and Iowa State did, and even though Iowa, I think, was better than Iowa State in the trenches, for Michigan, this may be a controversial opinion, I thought Michigan was pretty close to Texas in the trenches, either equal, maybe a little worse, maybe a little bit better. And I'm trending more to the latter, that Michigan's a little better in the trenches than a little worse than Texas. But regardless, Iowa State is so much better at quarterback and wide receiver that it didn't matter. Iowa's so one-dimensional on offense that Iowa State can stack the box. They know what you're going to do. Tim Lester's going to try the end arounds. He's going to try and run up the middle. He's going to try and get Caleb Johnson the football. And Caleb Johnson had very long and impressive runs on his 25 carries. On the season, 36 carries, 306 yards, 4 touchdowns. He's averaging 8.5 yards per carry. He may finish as like one of the best running backs in the Big Ten in a league that includes Jordan James, Travion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins, Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen, Kalel Mullings. You get the point. And also Dante Dowdle for Nebraska, and Jonah Coleman, Washington, Nate Carter, K'Ron Lynch-Adams. I mean, the Big Ten is stacked at running back here. Caleb Johnson's phenomenal at the big plays. But Iowa State stacked the box, and they clutched up late. And when you're this one-dimensional for Iowa, you're going to get in a lot of close games. And as I said earlier, a few seconds ago, Iowa and Michigan are about in the same boat. You're so one-dimensional that you are not going to blow out good teams. You are not going to dominate good teams. It may look like you are capable of it. And Iowa looked like they may have opened up the can of worms and were about to go on like a 27-30-0 bludgeoning of a rival who is a top 25 team. Iowa, I kid you not, in that first half of football looked like a legitimate top 15 team. The way that they were able to be somewhat efficient in the passing game, very good on the ground, and they were limiting a veteran-laden, good, maybe great Iowa State offense, particularly in the passing game. But that second half is damning. It's very damning. It shows that Iowa still has issues to work on. We knew this, but a 9.7 QBR, I mean, come on. That's horrible. That shows that this offense in the passing department may not be better than last year's unit. And if that's the case, even with the strides made on the ground game, made on the offensive line, which allowed 8 TFLs, yes, but only 1 sack. So far, this O-line still looks better than last year's O-line, and a defense that returned the majority of its production. Iowa will probably be in more close games than just the one they faced against Iowa State. And they were 5-1, I think, in close games last year, in one-score games. You can't win them all. Last year it was Minnesota. Maybe this year it's Iowa State, and Iowa just loses to Ohio State and goes 10-2. But Nebraska looks good, much better than they were last year. Minnesota looks better than they were last year. Michigan State will be a problem. They have the quarterback and the tight end, and even with what they did against Maryland now, the receivers to target some of Iowa's question marks at the cornerback position. There is no Cooper DeJean, no Riley Moss, none of the legendary Iowa cornerbacks of the 2010s. Jamari Harris, and John Nestor and others in that cornerback room, they're good, they're great. They are not legendary, not right now. And I expect that unit and the secondary to improve. I still think the defense is elite. But when your offense is that bad, asking your defense to hold all the opponents you play, even the good ones, to under 20 points per game is just very hard and sometimes very unreasonable. That's all I'm going to mention with Iowa, though, because I still think Iowa is a pretty darn good football team. I do. I think they're better than last year. It's a bad loss. It was a choke job. It was a great effort, great performance by Matt Campbell and Iowa State. And Iowa State's clearly a good team. So that helps out Iowa's case here, I think, for being a good team. And it's a rivalry game. Even though Iowa's dominated this rivalry, even though they have, it's still a rivalry game that's typically very competitive. And I was wrong here in my prediction. I predicted Iowa 23 and Iowa State 10. At the halftime, my prediction looked totally spot on. Even entering the third quarter, where it was 19-14, Iowa. If Iowa just kicked another field goal or scored another touchdown, 26 or 22-14 would have been pretty darn close to the score that I predicted. But then Iowa State kicked 2 field goals in the fourth quarter, shutting out Iowa in the fourth, completing the comeback. Another thing, too, to think about here is Iowa's decision to go for 2 in the third quarter. If they just kicked that extra point, would have been a tied game in overtime, but given how much Iowa State was fighting back, they would have won it in overtime. Iowa needed to win that game in regulation based off of where the momentum was heading. And that is a credit to Rocco Becht for not giving up after a very rough start. Credit to Abu Sama for playing behind an offensive line that was not good last year and that in this game did not do him many favors. They only allowed 2 TFLs and a sack, but early on, Iowa was still stonewalling them at the line of scrimmage. Sama, the third, didn't give up, though. 17 carries, 58 yards, 3.4 yards per carry. And he did have a few receptions, not for many yards, though. But Becht, Noel, Sama, the third, Jaden Higgins, Steve Okoltz, Benjamin Brahmer appeared in this game and had a long reception of 21. They didn't give up in the tough, loud road environment that is Kinnick Stadium. It's one of the more underrated places to play in college football. They put up 20 points and 252 yards in the second half. This offense has juice. You saw it a bit against North Dakota, where they were flinging the ball all over the field and they were beating people in man coverage, in tight coverage, in zone, just straight up with Jaden Noel and with Higgins. They were just beating people, and Becht was throwing dimes. You saw that again in this game, and I didn't think it would happen to this degree, but Becht finished 23 of 35 for 272 yards, 7.8 yards per pass attempt, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. He is not the best quarterback in the country, but to go up against Iowa on the road and make that performance says that he's one of the better QBs in the country. He's faced one of the best defenses in college football, and well, here we are. 23 of 35, 272, completed over 65% of his passes, got only sacked once, even had some scrambling yards. He did well in this game after a rough start in the first quarter and first half. Iowa State came back. They snatched victory from Iowa. And a huge credit to Matt Campbell for winning his second game in the Cyhawk series. Iowa State's schedule, I thought, was tougher than Iowa's preseason, even though Iowa plays Ohio State, and I don't think Iowa State plays anyone close to the caliber of Ohio State. They have to play Utah and Kansas State back-to-back at the end of the year. They have to travel to Kansas, to West Virginia, and they played at Iowa in the non-conference. That's a tough schedule for a Big 12 that no longer features Texas and Oklahoma. Texas by far would be the best team in the Big 12. Oklahoma would probably be top 4. So the conference got weaker, and Iowa State has a massive opportunity here. You got that non-conference win, and I think you have a tougher than typical schedule as it relates to the average Big 12 schedule. And even to some Big 10 schedules. I think Iowa State has a tougher schedule than Rutgers for sure, and possibly tougher than Iowa, though we'll see at the end of the year. That can help Iowa State. A win here, if they don't blow games later down the line, that can help them out and give them the case to potentially have an at-large college football playoff bid, depending on what Iowa does and how Iowa State does in the regular season. Because the Power 4 conferences and one Group of 5 champion, the highest rated, those are the only 5 auto bids. And you know the 12-team college football playoff is mainly going to be full of SEC and Big 10 teams, just given that those are by far the 2 strongest conferences in college football, especially the SEC. So this is a huge win for Iowa State, and I think they can win the Big 12. I know that Utah is big, they're bad, they're legendary with Kyle Whittingham, who looks like a movie star, and coaches like someone who has a beautifully written script. Just because how good he is. He's so good at developing and coaching that sometimes it's unbelievable that Utah can be one of the most physical teams in the country and produce as much NFL talent that they do with how they recruit and where they're located. But they do. Iowa State is one of those teams, along with Utah, that can win the Big 12 and that can compete with good teams in the Big 10. And potentially the SEC, though I will say the SEC, I think it's clear after 2 weeks, is a completely different animal than even the other 3, like even the Big 10. And I thought the SEC was going to be the toughest conference in the nation this year. It always is. Last year, the Big 10 had the better top-end teams, but I thought it was going to be the SEC this season, and it's even clearer now that that's the case. But along with Kansas State, maybe Kansas still if they can get some things right. The loss to Illinois was just non-conference, and they have a very easy schedule. The Big 12 looks not exactly as chaotic as it did 2 weeks ago because of how dominant Utah has looked. Because Iowa State, through 2 games, they haven't scored more than 20.5 points per game, but beating Iowa was huge. Kansas State escaped against Tulane. If there is someone who's going to challenge Utah, Iowa State could be that team. So pay attention to them, especially their passing offense, pass defense. And that defensive line stepped up. They allowed over 200 rushing yards, but Iowa's offensive line is going to be one of the better offensive lines they play all season. And their running back room, and dare I say it, combined with their wide receivers, who were very effective with end-arounds, they could have one of the best skill position groups in terms of running the football that Iowa State plays throughout the season. And Kansas has really good running backs. Utah has underrated running backs. Kansas State does as well. But Iowa does have a lot of potential, a lot of fuel on that ground game. And Iowa State stepped up when they needed to on defense and on offense. My MVP of the game is quarterback Rocco Becht. Again, 23 of 35 for 272 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. Played a good game. I think that he is going to be one of the Big 12's better quarterbacks this season. I mean, Noah Fafita's having some issues that people, including myself, didn't expect. I thought he would take a step back under a inferior coaching staff, but it looks like he's taking an even bigger step back. Shedeur Sanders doesn't look like he's living up to his talent. You got, Cam Rising hurt his fingers. We'll see what happens with him. But Becht, through 2 games, has a special chemistry with his receivers, and I would pay attention again to him and the offense that they run. And if their offensive line is able to fix up some of their issues and get healthy, and it's the same with the linebackers on defense, this team will only get better. So my game MVP is quarterback Rocco Becht. Honorable mention, I would say, is Iowa State's kicker. Iowa State's kicker, after missing before halftime, went 2 of 2. And he gave Iowa State the win, and he had a long field goal of 54 yards. That was the game winner. Very impressive. Very impressive for Iowa State. Also, Jalen Noel, 5 receptions, 133 yards, a touchdown, long of 75, an average of 26.6 yards per reception. He had that long bomb in the third quarter where Xavier Nwampka missed in coverage and Noel just took advantage. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Remember to like, subscribe, click the notification bell, and comment your thoughts on this video down below. Thanks to Crash2488 and Brasco Rascal for being Heisman Patreon members. Thanks to Chris Lane, Carlittle OH, Ismar, and Tyler Nye for being All-American Patreon members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, and Shanaisha Cockrell for being All-Conference Patreon members. If you want merchandise, you can sign up as a Heisman member for $6 a month for $25 a month. And you'll get free signed College Football with Sam merchandise delivered to you. If you want to purchase merchandise with no membership attached, visit my store via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. And that's also where you will find my Patreon page link. Have a great day, guys, and I will see you all soon. Bye-bye.